Hello, hope you are well today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the sin of Adam and Eve. And was it really about eating a fruit in the garden? Yes, they did eat a fruit, but what was really going on? Let's take a look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 4. Here, the serpent is talking to Eve, trying to deceive her into taking this fruit. But the serpent said to the woman, not to die. Remember, God said, if you eat of this tree, you will begin to die and eventually die. Well, the serpent said to the woman, not to die shall you be dying, for Elohim knows that on the day you eat of it, your eyes will be unclosed and you will become like Elohim, knowing good and evil. So, right off the bat, Satan is confusing Eve by telling her as much truth as he can in order to deceive her. And we know that the greatest deception has as much truth in it as can possibly be in it before you twist it and make it a lie because it's the most believable. So in here, the serpent says that you will become like God. And the truth of the matter is that we will become like God one day. We'll be God's own son and God's own daughters. That is our destiny. However, it's the way that we get there that's the deception. And that's the twist that Satan makes here. Satan tells us, and he told Eve back then, that you can get to God by doing it your own way, by doing it yourself. You can become like God by going against God and eating of the fruit of the tree. So that's the deception. Not that we're going to become like God. No, that's true. But the deception is how we become like God. It is not through us, it is by God's way that we will become like God. And if we continue to read other scriptures in Genesis 19, the end of Genesis chapter 3, verse 19, it says, for soil you are, and to soil you shall return. So God created us from the soil, and when we die, we go back to the soil. We don't go to hell, we don't go to heaven, we go back to death. We go back to the state that we were before we were created. There's many people that believe in the ancient Egyptian myth and relate that to Christianity, that when you die, your soul goes to heaven or your soul goes to hell. That's completely untrue. That's not even what the soul is. The soul is the meshing of body and spirit. Body and spirit together equals the soul. So once the body dies, the spirit goes back to God. There is no soul until God puts that spirit back into a body. And that would be our resurrected body. But until then, when we die, our spirit goes to God and we're no longer conscious, and our body dies, goes back to the soil. So we're non existent, and we would remain that way forever if we didn't have someone to resurrect us. And eventually we will be resurrected. Verse 22 then in chapter 3 says that then Yahweh Elohim said, behold, man has become like us, like one of us, in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he should stretch out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live for the eon. See, when people are on the earth after the great white throne judgment, we read in Revelations that mortals will go into the new heavens and the new earth, and there will be no death in the new heavens and the new earth, but mortals will still be there, but they will stay alive by eating of the tree of life. So by eating of the tree of life, you can stay alive forever, even though you're mortal. Whereas the believers in Jesus Christ will be made immortal, incapable of ever dying again. So what happened here in the garden was that Adam and Eve became like God, knowing good and evil. And that's the whole process here. That's the whole process of God and our existence on this earth, is to know good and evil. So now people know good and evil. We became like God, knowing good and evil. Now we need to go through this process of life here and be perfected through God's means. But what is God's means? What is God's way? So I said the deception here is not that we become like God, but the manner in which we become like God. So, what is the manner that we become like God? Well, if we look at Romans chapter 3, verse 21, now the Apostle Paul is speaking here, and he's making a transition from Abraham, Isaac, Israel, and the law of Israel to a new message that is going out to the Gentiles, which is a message of grace, pure unadulterated grace through faith in Jesus Christ. So now here's the switch. Romans chapter 3, verse 21, it says, "Yet now, apart from law," law has nothing to do with it, it's apart from law, "a righteousness of God is manifest, being attested by the law and the prophets, yet a righteousness of God through Jesus Christ's faith, for all, and on all who are believing. For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and wanting of the glory of God." So we've all sinned and we all come up short of the glory of God. So what is God's method to making us like God? His method is Jesus Christ. His method is the faith of his Son. The faith of his Son is going to bring us to be sons of God. The faith of his Son is going to bring us under the sonship and daughtership of God. It's because what Jesus Christ did, that's the method. And that's what's missed. That lie that Satan said in the garden, he's still using that lie today. He just reworked it a little bit. Because he convinced Eve to sin and do her own thing to get to God. That's the same thing Christians are doing today. Same thing all religion is doing today, because what they're doing is they're relying on their own faith, their own free will, their own following law, when this says apart from law, because it doesn't have anything to do with law anymore. Jesus Christ fulfilled it. It's Jesus Christ that does it for us, not us following the law. So people today in religion, they want to follow law, or they say they need to make a free will choice in order to be acceptable by God, accepted by God. And the Apostle Paul goes back to Abraham here in chapter 4 of Romans, verse 1. "What then shall we declare? That Abraham our forefather according to flesh has found? For if Abraham was justified by acts, he has something to boast in, but not towards God. For what is the scripture saying? Now Abraham believes God, and it is reckoned to him for righteousness." So Abraham was given righteousness not because of his acts, and that's what Paul's saying here. Apart from law, we are. It's not because of our acts or anything we have done, it's what Jesus Christ did. So Abraham was given that righteousness because he believed God. He believed God, what God said, so he was given that righteousness. He didn't do anything to earn that righteousness. He didn't follow the law. The law hadn't even come yet. So of course he didn't follow the law. But God gave him his righteousness because he believed God. Eve didn't believe God. Adam and Eve listened to what the serpent said. They believed the serpent. So, going back to Paul's statement in chapter 3, verse 21 and 22, he says, "Yet a righteousness of God through Jesus Christ's faith for all." So, it's what Jesus Christ did, not only what he did on the cross, his death and resurrection, but through his faith. Because Jesus Christ had to believe God when he was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane the night before his crucifixion. He asked God if there was some other way to do this. He didn't want to go through this process. He knew what was ahead of him. But he had to believe God, that God was going to bring him out of this. He had to give up his spirit to God and be dead. I mean, think of that. He was the first creation of God. Jesus Christ, all he knew was the glory of God. And he came to this earth, lived for years, and now he's going to go through death, something that he can't even comprehend. Yet he had to trust God with his spirit and die, and Jesus didn't exist for 3 days. And he had to trust that God was going to raise him from the dead. And Jesus Christ trusted God. He gave up his spirit. He laid it down for us, and he was resurrected. And it's by his faith and believing that Jesus did that and had that faith that we are given righteousness. It's not based on our faith, how strong it is, how little it is, or how great it is. It's not based on our faith. It's based on the faith of Jesus Christ. If we believe that Jesus Christ did that for us, that he gave up his spirit, that he died, he didn't go to heaven, he didn't go to hell, he didn't go anywhere else. He did not exist. He died. We go to the soil. We go to the soil. We die. The wages of sin is death, oblivion. We don't exist anymore. Just like we didn't exist before we were created. We go back to the soil. And we would stay there forever if it weren't for Jesus Christ. But Jesus Christ trusted God that he would raise him from the dead, and God did that. So if we believe that Jesus had that faith, that he died, didn't exist for 3 days, and God raised him up, if we believe that, then we're believers. And we put our faith in the faith of Jesus Christ. And some days we struggle with our own faith, we doubt certain things, but if we believe that Jesus did that, then we're saved by the faith of what Jesus did. Because each of us is given a measure of faith. If you look at Romans chapter 12, verse 3, it says, as God parts to each the measure of faith. So God gives us faith. We make no free will choice. We don't follow laws. We're not do-gooders in order to get salvation. We believe God. We believe what Jesus did. It's not about walking a life of perfect faith, because some of us are given a little measure of faith, some of us are given a great measure of faith, as Romans chapter 12, verse 3 says. But it's believing that Jesus Christ had the faith in God, that when he died, he would be resurrected, and was. If we believe that, then God credits us with righteousness, the righteousness of Jesus Christ. And that faith is apart from us. So no one can boast. It's completely of God. Jesus Christ did it all, and then God gives us a measure of faith to believe that. That's God's method. To become like God. To become sons of God. To become daughters of God. To have the attributes of God. So going back to the garden, the lie of Satan, which rings true today, is that human beings can attain by good works, or by making a free will confession, or by doing an altar call, or having enough faith of their own to impress God. That completes the task. Believing that is the lie. Because that's doing it yourself. Any free will, anything that you do that someone else does that makes you more righteous than them, or gets you closer to God because you did this and they didn't do that, then that's self-righteousness. And you're seeking to establish your own righteousness as opposed to the righteousness of Jesus Christ. It's understanding that you are out of the picture, and that God gives you a faith to understand that Jesus did it all for you. So I urge you not to become like the ones in Romans chapter 10 here, where it says, for they, being ignorant of the righteousness of God, and seeking to establish their own righteousness, were not subjected to the righteousness of God. For Christ is the consummation of the law for righteousness to everyone who is believing. See, if you're looking to establish your own righteousness, you're trying to say that there's something within you that you have done, or that you have that someone else doesn't have, and that you were smart enough or good enough or refrain from doing something long enough in order to earn what Jesus Christ did for you. That's establishing your own righteousness. But understanding God's righteousness is understanding that it's faith that's given to you to believe something that's been done for you. And whether you believe it or not, it's been done for every creature that ever walked the face of this earth. That Jesus Christ went to the grave, and through his faith, that God would raise him from the dead. And when God did, that means that everything that dies will be raised from the dead because of Jesus Christ. And if you believe that, you believe that Jesus Christ's faith was strong enough and he was raised, and it applies to all creation, then you have been given faith. And depending on that measure, that's up to God. But the ultimate act of saving you and saving all mankind is through the faith of Jesus. And that's God's method.